Well, it's Friday. As you can tell, I'm not at the Penn State show. Let me go get cleaned up and we'll get into it. If you're new around here, hi, I'm Erica. This is August, the star of the show this week, and Obi, and I run a small art business out of my home studio in Ellicott City, Maryland, where I have 3 lines. I have my paper cuts, my plant accessories, and then I have a tiny little horse girl accessory line. So, if you want to hang out and see what kind of goes on in a real business, let's do it. Well, long story short, we're not at the Penn State show. In fact, it's the middle of the afternoon at the Penn State show. It would have worked out that we were gonna leave on Wednesday. Setup was Wednesday night, and then the show was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Well, on Monday, and this is a little further back, 2 weeks ago, August had signs and symptoms of pancreatitis. And so on Monday, he had a flare-up of that. So basically, his innards are just inflamed. So we had to go back to the vet on Monday and get an anti-diarrhea. And then on Tuesday, he had to go back to the vet for like a more in-depth examination, which included like blood work and x-rays and stuff. And, you know, I would have been dropping them off at camp, like probably the middle of the day on Tuesday. Well, obviously August was at the vet, so that's not an option. So, you know, after the vet appointment on Tuesday, it was like, I don't feel great sending him to camp or having someone watch him while he's not feeling well. And we went through all the logistics, like there was no one at home to watch them. And the hotel was pet friendly, so we could have taken them. But Obi is really reactive, so I can't take Obi to a show and have him in my booth. August, yeah, that's no problem. So then I would have had to send Obi to camp alone, which he'd probably be okay, and take August with us. Well, there's no electricity at this show. So August, who hasn't had his grooming appointment in 8 weeks, and, you know, so he's a little furry, and has a heart murmur would be like out in the heat. I mean, he would have had a fan, and I would have packed his cool pad and a wet towel. Like, I wasn't too worried about the heat, but it's just not ideal. The whole situation was not ideal. So, I mean, I looked at all the logistics like that. Like, could we take him? Would he be able to stay in the hotel? All these different things. And it was all logistically possible. So then I made my mom discuss it with me for literally hours. And in the end, the cons just really outweighed the pros of going and taking him. Like, there's obviously sunk cost fallacy. I did the inventory. I spent the time making the inventory, paid for the hotel, paid for the show, paid for the seller's permit for state college. Like, there's a lot going into it. But, if we didn't go, like, there's setup and tear down and manning the booth for days, and August being there and managing August's health there, along with, like, taking him for walks when he has to go to the bathroom. And if I'm alone in the booth, how am I going to do that? Or my dad was out of town, but he could have come up to Penn State on Friday and, like, hung out in the hotel room with August for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Like, it's all logistically possible. It's just not worth it, so. So by Tuesday night, I had kind of decided we're probably not going to go. We even floated the idea of contacting the show and being like, could we come and set up on Friday night and be there for the weekend? Because then my dad would be home and he could watch the dogs over the weekend. And I didn't want to make, like, an emotional decision. I mean, let's be honest. If I was making an emotional decision, my decision would be like, I'm not going. I'm not going. It's work. It's in the heat. Anxiety about my dog. Like, yeah, I'm not going. So I was like, all right, I don't have to make any decision until tomorrow morning. So I slept on it, and by the morning I was just like, I just still think the cons outweigh the pros. So probably spent a good 15, 20 hours deciding whether or not we were going to go, trying to make it work. It's just not a great feeling dipping on a show. So, a lot of shows have rules where if you don't show up, they won't invite you back for a year, ever, whatever period of time. And for a lot of people who do, like, tiny shows, like farmers market, stuff like that, that are like $25 shows, I think it's more common for people to not show up and also not worry about not showing up. But the problem with not showing up to a show, which you've committed to, by the way, you know, guilty party here, feel real bad about it, but the promoter relies on you to come and make the show a success by being entertainment or good shopping or whatever word you want to put on it. And the other artists rely on you to come because if you go to a show and like half the booths are missing, you're like, what's wrong with this place? You know, like something's going on and it's not good. You know, so like having empty booth spaces is detrimental to other booth spaces. So not only is the show relying on you to come, the other artists are relying on you to come. And also you committed to going. When I decided I wasn't going, that morning, so Wednesday, setup day, I called their office line, which a volunteer was staffing, so not ideal, but telling someone. So I left a message with her about how, you know, that I was very sorry and honestly very embarrassed that I wasn't going to come to the show because, you know, there was a medical emergency for my pet and I just couldn't make it work logistically. And that I'm very sorry. And here's my booth number. And I hope, you know, it was hours before setup check-in started. So my hope was that if they knew, they could move someone from the end of the street into my booth spot in the middle of the street so that there wouldn't be an empty spot. I don't know if they did that. And then, because, you know, I'd really only told a volunteer, like, I'm sure she did her best. But I emailed the show director and I basically reiterated the same thing, that I was very sorry, very embarrassed, you know, that I had to do this and that we had this medical emergency. Here's my booth number. Basically, I'm very sorry. Called boarding camp. Canceled the dog's camp week. You know, so I had to do my little embarrassing run of like apology tour. Which I think there's a lot of people who just don't show up, you know, and like obviously that's one way to go about it. But I value this show and I value this show promoter. And so, you know, I'd like to maybe stay in her good graces by telling her that I'm not coming and stuff. You know, I don't know if she ever got my email because she never replied. But it's also the middle of the show right now, so I'm sure she's busy. Besides the financial cost of not going, there's definitely like relief and disappointment. Like, trust me, it's so nice to go to a show and have people like build your ego up all weekend by telling you how great your stuff is or how talented you are. I mean, who wouldn't like that? that doesn't pay the bills. This is, you know, the emotional fuel. And there's relief at not going because, like, I don't have to do the physical labor. I don't have to do the emotional labor of, like, talking to people, you know, as an introvert for 4 days straight, all day, every day. I mean, the hours were like 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Long day. All talking to people. Customer service personality. And obviously there's the disappointment of not fulfilling a commitment I made, not a commitment I made to the other artists, but you know how I was talking before about how, like, the other artists rely on you to come, so there's no empty booth spaces and stuff like that. Like, you hate to be that person who just doesn't show up. But yeah, I mean, it's always a relief to not have to do physical labor. You know, and some of the costs might be considered like that I made all this inventory. And that is a cost. The time, you know, I spent like 2 months really preparing for these 3 shows and not going to one of them. And then, you know, the supplies to make them, frames, mats, all that kind of stuff. Oh, do you fit this way? But long term, that's not too much of an issue for me because I can take this inventory to another show. I can put it online. I can cannibalize it like we talked about last week. You know, so in the grand scheme of things, the inventory isn't a lost cost. So, what now? Well, Wednesday, needless to say, I had some free time, so I took some naps and hung out with my sister on Thursday. But now it's back to work, and we're gonna have to go through all of these and unframe everything, put the crates back in the garage, maybe go through and decide what needs to be cannibalized again, because, you know, sometimes you look at stuff and you're like, not good, bad. But for right now, I'm just gonna take it one step at a time at cleaning this freaking studio. So I hope you'll come join me along for that next week, because we got a lot to do.